Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Dalmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of statewide news service JPSDechValley.com, and now columnist for the Jewish Press.
Right, the Jewish Press is a weekly newspaper, the most widely read weekly newspaper in the observant Jewish community nationwide. And I have a column called Albany Beat where I talk about how government relates to the Jewish community, or doesn't, as the case may be. So I'm very happy to be able to do that. So as we talk about government, we have a special guest with us today who's involved with the government as a lobbyist or advocate. Harvey Rosenthal is the executive director of the New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services, NYAPRS. So welcome to the Jewish View, Harvey.
Pleasure to be
I've
here.
known you for about 30 years.
It's true.
And it's just remarkable, all the issues that you've had to contend with over the years. It's some years are more successful than others.
Absolutely.
So how was this past legislative session?
Well, I think the top issue for us was the trying to address the amount of overlap there is between the criminal justice system and people with mental illnesses or psychiatric disabilities.
Is there any overlap?
Well,
I mean, once they send them to jail, again, I know a little bit.
I guess what I mean is there's so many people with mental illnesses involved in the criminal justice system, and our job has been to try to limit that through diversion.
Put them in mental ill patients in hospitals, better than in jail, than incarcerate
not necessarily
them.
even in the community. I mean, we're a community-based group, so we're looking for alternatives to hospital as well. That's very much a part of our movement, is to try to move away from institutionalization, whether it's be prisons or hospitals. So the front end of diversion, I mean, you read in the papers all the time in the last year about the interactions between the police and various groups. And there's been a lot of episodes of deaths and abuse. Now, that's not to say police are abusive and violent, but it is to say that very often they don't know how to handle people with mental illnesses.
And those people were mentally ill, you think?
Some of the people, some. But I guess what I'm saying is there's a pattern in this country and probably all over where the mental health system doesn't always function well enough to help people stay out of trouble. And certainly people are responsible for that. But in any event, they come into contact with the police. And all too often the police are not trained to respond. And too often they unwittingly escalate a situation that results in sometimes a tragedy or sometimes in avoidable incarceration. And very often the first incarceration is a pathway down from that should have been avoided. So we worked very hard, and this was the second year, Mark, that we got more money to set up crisis intervention teams around the state. Last year we got $400,000. This year we got $1.5 million.
From the state.
From the state, and
in the
really
budget?
from the legislature.
In the budget.
In the budget. So that will mean that police in 8 or 10 localities will be trained how to better respond. 40 hours
So
of
how does
training.
that money get allocated? Is it through Office of Mental Health, or?
Yeah, the checks come from the Office of Mental Health, but the legislature has some real role in deciding which localities get it. So 6 were picked last year, and this year there'll be more.
Who are the chair people in the Assembly and Senate?
It's
of the
Aileen Gunther is the chairwoman from the Assembly Mental Health Committee, and David Carlucci is the chairperson from the Senate.
Okay, so that's why a lot of your
Or he
measures-
was. This year it's Rob Ord from Western New York.
Okay, the new guy.
I do.
The new guy.
He is the new guy.
And you get along with him?
Very much. He's a very good man.
Okay, so he's very good with the issues?
Right away he was. He hit the ground running.
Because,
And all of them, all 3 of them. I mean, Senator Carlucci was the sponsor. He's the one that put the first year of money in the CIT program.
Well, I noticed that a lot of the measures have Carlucci Gunther
Very much.
as a sponsor.
They're a real
so
partnership.
I was wondering what that connection was, but now you.
Well, I think he introduced some bills last year that have continued, and
Sure.
Senator Ord is now
Right.
the partner there from the
Okay,
Senate.
great. And so, I always like the audience to get to know who our guest is from a personal point
Sure.
of view. So can you tell us how you got to be the executive director and what
Yep.
inspired you leading up to the creation of this organization?
Thank you. Happy to talk about it. So I'm raised in New York City, born in New York City, raised on Long Island. I go to school in the Bronx. I start to have what becomes a depression. And instead of winding up in a commune in California, which is where I was hoping to wind up, I wound up in a mental hospital in Long Island. And I was there for 6 weeks, and it was a very profound depression, and it began really what has been a life in recovery ever since. So I'm in recovery 43 years from a serious mental illness, which is now really I see it more as not just depression, but up and down, bipolar sort of condition. I wind up eventually coming up to Albany to get back on my feet. I wind up working in the Psychiatric Center at the State Hospital. I work on the inpatient unit, 77 to 1980. I work in the outpatient clinic.
Is this Capital District Psychiatric
Capital
Center?
District.
CDPC.
CDPC. And then I move over to run a rehab program. It used to be across the street.
Did they hire you
Yeah.
at CDPC because you had the personal experience?
They didn't know at
They didn't
first, and I was working with a young man voluntarily, and they asked me to become. I didn't want him to be in an institution,
Yeah.
so I offered to take him as a family care parent for a period of time, and they were impressed with that, and they offered me a job.
Oh my gosh. That's
So, but later I disclosed. Back in the 70s, it was not okay to disclose that you had a mental illness.
sure, no. it
You were
wasn't.
sort of dismissed.
Even today.
It's
a
much.
stigma.
It's different though. I'm part of a movement where people are out, and a matter of fact, having a mental health history is valued. In fact, we run programs that only hire people with mental illnesses to help each other, and they're
But
very
that's a
effective
special-
programs.
But that's a special niche. I'm talking about getting into.
Politics, you could say.
Yeah,
The politicians
no.
said they were institutionalized.
Oh, that's almost.
They don't, but I tell you a funny
That's what I'm
story. So
saying.
I'm against the stigma. We're all against the stigma of mental
yeah.
illness, the shame, the discrimination, the defamation, segregation. That happens with people with mental illnesses. So I always disclose in the legislature about my mental illness. And recently I said to Mrs. Gunther, I have a mental illness, and she said, everybody knows you have a mental illness. Because I think it's important to disclose.
Well, I wanted to. I've asked this question of other guests. What is normal? You talk about mental illness, but what is
Well, I
normal?
think one of the reasons there's a stigma of mental illness is because it's a continuum. Everyone has periods where they're anxious, or depressed, or confused, or they hit a bottom in some fashion.
So is that no one's really normal per se?
Well, I
There
think
is
it's a
no normal,
continuum.
know?
Even us on a given,
Right.
through a week or a given day. But there is a cutoff line at some point, maybe. There's an experience where people go beyond that, where they're not able to work, they're not able to
They're
function in a
incapacitated.
relationship,
Right.
have trouble with housing. That's where you start getting into what's called a psychiatric disability. The reason I think there's stigma is people don't want to be those people. So we're the normals, and they're not. And I think it's a shame because people are really cutting off the fact that it's a continuum, and we all experience difficulties. But too often it's been those people. And when I came down with my mental illness, I was frightened, and that I would be those people, and I would always be those people.
There were some really great authors and artists who were afflicted with mental illness.
Absolutely.
And it's just a shame if you can just just have a trajectory in your career path. You could be very successful even with a mental illness.
I don't want to romanticize it, but I think and I think everybody's different. I always say of myself, I have 2 more gears up and 2 more gears down than most people. My job is to balance that, but there are times that extra productivity, well managed. Really works for me.
Has the medication to manage mental illness gotten better and more sophisticated?
It's debatable. There's a real
I'm asking
controversy.
you.
Yeah, no, I'm saying it's
You
a
know.
controversy. I mean, the people that ultimately the authority, and not just me, it's the people that take it,
Well, you
and the
take
people
it.
that watch. I do take medicine,
So
but when I was hospitalized, they put me on a medicine that made me feel numb and thirsty. I got off that medicine. I've tried other medicines over the years that were not the right medicines. Now I take the right medicine, and I'm pleased to do that. But medicine is not for everybody.
right.
And too often in our system, we prescribe too many medications,
Right.
too strong for too long. And so medication should be used very strategically, and too often it is the only or major treatment.
Sure.
They say that, again, from a little experience talking to my son who deals with special children, and and then he tells me statistics, like 1/3 of the children are on Ritalin.
Yeah.
You were just on that idea that children are over-medicated. Well, I'm not a doctor to say it's right or wrong. It just seems to me that that's being over-medicated.
I think people and kids are very different. I was the kind of kid in my family where I was more active, I was more restless, I had more curiosity. What, did I have ADD, or or was I in a family that just found me to be very demanding? When I was in school, I was bored easy. Was it that I had ADD, or I was in the wrong school placement?
Well, you were really smart. And
Or
you were
I-
That's what I'm
bored
saying.
with
I
the-
like to think so.
Yeah.
Well, that's what Mark was saying. Some of the most creative, energetic people that
Sure.
do things, you could label them, oh, they're ADD and something's wrong with them. And in the meantime, they made the greatest discoveries, or they're the greatest artists.
I think
Again,
people
that's
have
what
to
Mark's saying,
define
who's
that for
normal?
themselves, unfortunately.
Yeah, but
And I
the
think-
doctors say that.
Yeah.
You know, they're putting, my kid's a little hyper. Oh, okay, here's.
There are many people
here's
that feel like
Ritalin.
we've overdiagnosed
Yeah,
all
but
kinds
that's
of
what I'm
conditions
saying.
and over-medicated people. I agree with
That's
you.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And now the second thing, which I have, again, personal experience, because I visit many inmates in the Jewish, but other people come because
Sure.
it's an open society, so to make a difference. I see a lot of inmates, and and again, the statistics are that 1/3 of the inmates in New York State, and it's a lot, are mentally ill. So are they getting, just locking a
to
person
that
behind
point,
bars?
well,
Is
to
it gonna
that
help
to
any
that point, I
situation?
mentioned earlier crisis intervention teams.
Good.
The goal of that is to keep people out of prison. But when they get into prison, for too many years, this horror of horrors, people with mental illnesses were seen by the correction officers as challenging, as a defiant, as a non-compliant, when that was really a function of their symptoms and their needs. And they would be put in solitary confinement, which is like a cell within a jail, prison within a prison. And too often they were there, they went in for a charge for a year, were there for 3 years, 5 years, in the dark, 23 hours, in a cell by yourself. So one of the great victories we had a couple of years ago was we won a campaign that's called the SHU exclusion law, SHU being solitary confinement. And it basically says that if you have a serious mental illness, you cannot be in solitary confinement past a couple of weeks, if at all. And they've increased the treatment in the prisons. I don't know if you see that where you go, Rabbi. But there's a lot more treatment going on in the prison, and a lot more effort at better discharge planning so people don't go back.
How taxing, with your mental illness, how taxing is dealing with all these dozens of issues for NYAPRS?
Those issues have helped me be healthy.
Okay.
Because what the passion I have about this takes me beyond my limitations. You would understand, right? You have that, I'm sure, yourself.
I have a passion. I have lots of
Right,
passions.
that's right. So
And I
the
get
passion
sometimes-
and the empathy and the determination, thanks to my mother, my Jewish mother, who was very determined, has allowed me to really push myself, and it gets me past some days, tough days.
Because people tell me I have a lot of passion, but I go overboard where it comes out maybe like anger, or it comes out.
Well, you should be a mental
really-
health advocate. You're allowed to be angry.
Really forceful, and they say, "Oh, I see the passion
Yeah.
in what you're saying." It's just that I should say it in a more delicate way, or in a more, And I'm not really PC. I mean, I say things the way I think they should
Sure.
be said. And,
Well,
you know.
I think politics is sometimes poker, and I think you have to find a balance. Sometimes you have to be very strong, but I think you build up relationships and credibility, so when you do that, you're not seen as somebody out of control or a bomb thrower. I try to be seen as a reasonable, thoughtful person, but when there's a problem, it has to be addressed.
And you're able to hold back your real feelings of what you really
Generally,
want.
last week I had trouble. It was a meet.
Harvey, I mean, again, just looking like Mark was saying, from 1970s and
Sure.
talking of practically a half a century.
Yep.
Really, your job, I mean, maybe it's part of you, giving you the kudos and the credit, but the mental illness health profession, like I say, they're thinking more about how to help prisoners and keeping people out of mental health hospitals.
Sure.
So really, there's been great strides if you want to look at a.
I feel
You know,
blessed to be part of a
yeah.
recovery movement that when I worked in the state hospital, we told people they would never get well.
Mm-hmm.
We put them on disability and told them this meant they would be poor all their lives. We told them they couldn't get married. We told them that we would pretty much control what they would do. We've come a long way since then, to your point.
Sure.
So we believe people can recover, and we expect providers to support them to recover.
And I saw you at the 25th anniversary of the ADA,
Yes.
so the Americans for Disability Act celebration. So how does the ADA impact with what your
It's a great question.
agenda is?
Well, it goes to the point we were saying earlier. It was okay years ago. It was expected that people would go back to the hospital regularly, and they would be there sometimes for years and years, and sometimes forever.
Well, people think of the ADA as ramps and access
Yes.
and physical access, and you're talking about mental access.
And what
So-
what it says is, not only is it the wrong thing to keep people in institutions, for states it's against the law. It's against federal law. And the Federal Department of Justice goes into states and sues them, as we have in New York. We're being sued now for allowing people with psychiatric disabilities and others to be in institutions. They shouldn't be in adult homes in New York City. State has lost a lawsuit that they've kept too many people in adult homes where they were housed, given really in too many instances, the wrong kind of treatment. That lawsuit has resulted in people being able to move to apartments and getting support. That's like the recovery movement in action, but it fits together when the law says people have to live in the most integrated setting.
And that's part of the ADA.
And the practice has improved.
That's part of the ADA.
The
When you say
ADA
the
says
law.
that, yeah.
Okay.
The law is the part there. That's the
Okay.
Olmsted interpretation of the ADA.
So let me ask you this, since Rabbi Simon's been talking about, it could be better part of 50 years that, this has been going on, where it's been in the public forum, not that it's...
Yes, sure.
1975, there was a movie, Jack Nicholson movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah.
Did that help? Did that hurt? Did that stigmatize? Did that characterize mental illness?
Well, actually, that movie really served to make the people with mental illnesses look like they were controlled, and that they were being helped to get out of that Nurse Ratched sort of, the use of chemical restraints, over-medication.
Electroshock.
So I think, I suppose, I didn't think about it at the time, but what it said was that people, you could argue, had rights and shouldn't be controlled as much by the nurses and the psychiatric professionals, as was the case routinely.
Because shortly after, 1981, is when you started NYAPRS, so I'm just wondering if there was some, if there was
I think the
swell.
movie helped, but I think it was more of confluence of factors. I think there's something called the consumer movement that I'm a part of, that really were people with mental illness saying, I can recover, I don't want to be controlled, I don't want the treatment to be worse than the illness. There's the recovery movement, there's the psychiatric rehabilitation movement that said people should be given a chance to define their own goals and figure out the skills they have to have and the support. So there's been a series of movements, the consumer, the recovery, the rehabilitation, peer support, the Olmsted movement, that is built on itself.
Another problem, which again, that little bit I know of, is just that I know someone who's a psychologist, and it's in New York State, it's the Mountain Division, and they say, because that's when they need them in Afghanistan, it's all mountains, so the soldiers coming back, he said 50%, again, these are high numbers, there's
Tragedy.
always somebody
Terrible tragedy.
that have some kind of issues.
And the suicide rate amongst veterans is, I think more people have been killed at their own hands than in the field.
Yes.
Really.
So
And
that's not traumatic.
because of the warfare, meaning the close.
Well, I think it brings up,
warfare.
one of the other trends in the system is trauma-informed care. And what that says, it's not always about brain chemistry and medication, or it's genetic. People are traumatized, rape, domestic violence, war, and that creates a bunch of symptoms. But it, again, can be treated rather than the old belief that people would be sick for life.
So, in all the years that you've been involved with this, which legislator was your biggest advocate over the years?
You're going to get me in trouble if I say.
No, because the person might not be around.
Sure.
Do you miss the most? Who do you miss the most?
Maybe they're present, maybe there's nothing to miss.
Well, I thought Assemblyman Stephen Sanders,
Yes.
nice Jewish boy from New York City,
Yes.
and Senator Nick Spano,
Uh-huh.
they co-wrote the Community Reinvestment Act. So NYAPRS Starts in 81, but in 92, I come over there, and it's a paid staff person, and we begin to organize.
Oh.
Well, people with mental illnesses were a big part of that campaign, and Steve and Nick were the sponsors, and even the governor, Mario Cuomo, really resisted it, and we had to keep coming back to the Capitol, but eventually they closed 5 state hospitals and transitioned $200 million to grow the mental health system. So those two, those are the two I came in with, and they were really very solid. But even the current ones, we've had a whole stream of them.
Well, but I understand. But there are some people who wrap their arms around certain issues. Some legislators that are just considered Mr. So-and-so in that field.
Sure.
And they're iconic just for one movement.
Yep.
And I just wanted to.
Yeah, those two in particular, because that issue is so important.
So it doesn't take away from anyone else. It was
No, they're
just,
all good. Senator
know,
Ort with
yeah.
CIT, somebody win Gunther.
No, but I'm just saying, I'm not trying to take away from
No, I
anyone,
appreciate it.
You know, within this 50 years, have you seen that people have a tendency to be mentally ill? You know, it's always, or maybe because you opened it up, hey, there's no stigma. Maybe beforehand,
Well, you know,
don't tell anybody.
the current statistic is 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 Americans has some form of mental illness.
Really?
And some higher amount, whether it's family member, spouse, partner, are touched by that. So, again, it goes back to how you define it and what have you. But I don't know that people are more, you could say with the, more veterans, more of that kind of mental illness. But
There was
overall,
Vietnam in
I
the
think
1960s too.
it's okay to be able to express that you have difficulty and get help for it. So I don't think to your point, I think more people are out of the closet and it's more okay to be talking about that.
Well, I just think also, when you look for something, you find it.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at, like cancer, for example, you would say, oh, he's sick. Papa's sick. They would never say he's got the C word or he's got the cancer. Papa's sick. Leave him alone. Let him be. He needs his rest.
Absolutely.
That was code for, he's got this cancer,
Absolutely.
So you just kind of come out, and you're more free of using words that you wouldn't normally use in society on the street.
And I think that's
every
particularly
day.
true about addiction and abuse, big family secrets. Daddy's sick. Well, maybe daddy's an alcoholic who's an abuser. I'm not trying to characterize, but I think to your point, that was minimized or clouded with the word like sick.
Yeah.
But once you talk about drugs, I mean, and you may know the statistics, but in the 60s it was LSD, and there's bad trips. You get that idea, and even though they want to legalize marijuana, on the other hand, and I don't know, maybe you know more than I do, I'm sure you do, marijuana does get people sick. Some people say it's harmless, and other people say
So can I talk about that?
Yeah.
Please do. That's
So
what I'm
remember I
asking
talked
you.
about the 60s, and I don't know if I said that it was a time when people were getting free and letting it all hang out. Well,
Good.
I had a very painful childhood, so it wasn't something, if I let it all hang out, all this pain sort of came up. So to your point, I did smoke marijuana during that period, thinking it would get me free. And I think it may out some people, not me. What it did was uncover a great fear that I had, and actually confess that I tried LSD too, and had 11 trips, and they were all bad. And that was, maybe people have good trips, and maybe people have good experience with pot. Everybody has to make their own determination about that. They were not good for me.
And what about cocaine or heroin?
Not me, but
No, not
I'm
you.
just saying, I'm just
Sorry,
saying that's a
that's-
source of mental illness that they didn't have to such
again,
an
in my
extent
case, I
50,
think I
60
had the
years
seeds
ago.
of problems. Not to belabor this, but I think, marijuana is a complex thing. I've seen people who are not sitting on a lot of pain and are more able to manage it, have a great experience. I've seen people who get depressed, who get some relief from that. Then there are people like me who did not. It threw me into a tailspin. It uncovered the amount of fear that I had. It disabled me.
Yeah, but there's so
I
many
don't
people
say it's
almost
all or
dying.
nothing at all. It depends
People
on
are
the person.
dying of heroin, they say. We have many people, Mark and I, have share of some
Yeah, I think that's a terrible drug. We were talking more about pot.
just,
Pot to me and heroin are very different things.
Yeah, sure.
No, I know
Oh,
they are,
absolutely.
but maybe it leads to mental illness, that. people want to take off of it, and
Could be. I mean, personally, I think what the seeds of addiction and mental illness are not so much the drugs in my mind. The drugs may become something people use when they already have troubles, and then the drugs cause more problems. But
interesting.
yeah.
Now, you say here that from your website that NYAPRS members helped form and lead a cross-disability advocacy coalition that won approval of the Medicaid buy-in program of 2002 Underemployment.
Sure.
What was that about?
Yeah, I'm glad to talk about that. So, one of the biggest reasons there was a study once that 70% of people on disabilities wanted to work, but only 30 did. And in the mental health area, only like 5% did.
Because the employers don't want to hire them?
Well, people were
You're saying?
afraid, and to this point, people eventually they were told they couldn't work, they were on entitlements, and to take a risk to work was very frightening to people. And then one of the number one reasons, if you ask people why they don't go back to work, is I don't lose my health insurance. Medicaid is the primary health insurance for lots of people. The buy-in was a program that was active in other states, but not in New York, that said to people, the rallying cry was work and wellness. You could keep your Medicaid and go to work. You could make even $44,000 or more, as long as you had, a verifiable disability and go to work. Interestingly, that campaign that was my one and only time at civil disobedience.
Oh, yeah?
Where we chained ourselves to the governor's
Yeah.
office, Governor Pataki's office,
Yeah.
and 7 of us got arrested, and including me.
Yeah.
But it was brief, and they let us go, but I think it helped the campaign, so we're very proud of that.
Well, that's great. What else do you want to bring out in this interview that we didn't know enough to ask?
Well, I would focus a little bit on Medicaid redesign in New York and the
yeah.
Affordable Care Act.
Sure.
I think those are revolutionary. We talked about the recovery movement, Olmstead, but what healthcare reform really means is that the most powerful force to change the mental health system is at play: money. The money doesn't want to write checks for people to be sick anymore. It's too expensive. And it's an indignity. So what the money is saying in New York and nationally is we want to pay for outcomes, not just people going to service, that the service produce an effective outcome, that it be well coordinated, that it be focused on prevention and wellness, that it invest in and help people be accountable for what they do around their health care. In New York, and that the care is integrated. So I'm watching right now mental health, addiction, and medical services be integrated through Medicaid redesign.
Wow.
It's critical because
And you were on that team.
I am on the Medicaid redesign team and the behavioral health work group.
I remember that. When I
And now we're
went to some
going
of the
to
meetings.
value-based sort of payment group. I'm on that one now. And that is that's where we're going, which is we're going to pay for outcomes. So the system, hospitals, community providers, basically are held more accountable to work together, to coordinate, to invest people in their treatment, and to get outcomes.
So is
It's
Andrew
very
Cuomo
exciting.
a good governor when it comes to this?
He came on very strong in the beginning, and what he did, which was very sort of clever, during the Pataki administration, which is the one I got arrested to change on that, they were trying to do Medicaid reform, to their credit. But what happens is there are a lot of people kind of throw bombs and say, oh, you're killing our medical system, our hospitals, people, babies in the street.
Businesses.
And what Cuomo did was say, he put the same people that fight any change, Medicaid reform, put them on the team.
Right.
And said to them, I can cut you all, or you can get into reform.
Right.
It was a brilliant and tough move,
Well.
but a lot of the changes that we're seeing now were because people had no choice but to change. And
Well,
that's very different from years. In the past years, people were defending the system. People were now saying, we cannot defend the system. We have
Well,
to change.
there's an expression, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
He did a good job with
So
that.
those people who were opposing, keep them on the team, keep them closer, bring them in on the ground floor, give them a great understanding
Yes.
of at least where things are going, because once you keep someone away and you close the door, there's a suspicion that you're trying to hide something. You bring them in on the other side of the door, and right away they're open and they're saying, oh, now we see it.
So look, the old system was more about sickness and hospitalization.
Right,
When you change that, who objects to that? Hospitals,
right,
labor unions.
right.
Too bad they can't think more progressively. Medicaid redesign said you got to think differently.
Okay.
That's where the money's going. So I'm not anti-hospital or union, but they needed to think
Sure.
more progressively, and they were required to
I
think
can't
that way.
imagine you being anti-union.
Well, they could be better. They could perform better.
Yeah,
State worker unions have too often
but that's different than
held
being
on to the
anti.
past.
And that's being
Not against it, I
anti-union.
just
Right.
wish they were a little more
Better.
progressive.
Right, right, right.
Comes
So,
in.
Harvey, thank you very much. You know, you're on the Jewish View. A nice Jewish man like you have Jewish View, but I actually have Jewish values of helping the unfortunate people in our society. And I'm glad that
I feel that
you
way.
came here, and continue your good work
Thank
and
you.
with good health.
My
Continued
Jewish faith
success.
really informs me. I appreciate the opportunity
Good.
to talk about it.
Very nice.